Hi everyone, Dr. Jeffress back with the next installment of talking to you really more so than lecturing, but using PowerPoint and going over things that I would lecture about in class if I were there and with you. So today I want to talk about logical fallacies. Such an important topic because, I mean, what is a logical fallacy? All right. So a logical fallacy is an attempt by someone to make an argument, but the argument's invalid. It's not based on sound logic. So it's an invalid argument. It's a fallacy of reasoning. Sometimes we do this accidentally. We just haven't thought through what we're saying. But a lot of times in rhetoric, or what might be referred to as by Wayne Booth as rhetorickery, right? It's done on purpose. People make these arguments that sound appealing, right? That have a lot of pathos and are persuasive. And they do it intentionally to try to deceive people to get what they want. So it's a case of the end justifying the means. So a lot of advertising involves logical fallacies, frankly. It's not ethical, but it works, right? We make people believe, you know, if you take this pill, you know, you're going to look great, feel great, have a great sex life, and have a great body, and be happy, and all of this, when it's a pill for, you know, controlling allergies. But the way it's presented, it's like a panacea. And, you know, we're going to look at some specific examples of different types of logical fallacies. But this is such an important topic because today we're seeing so much of the political rhetoric today involving logical fallacies. You know, politicians saying things that in most cases I have to believe they know what they're saying is not true. And the arguments that they're making, they know that they are stupid arguments, that they really defy the laws of logic, but they're counting on the people that they're talking to not using logic, not having good critical thinking skills, and just being persuaded by the aura of an argument and the pathos. And I mean, logical fallacies can be quite convincing. But unfortunately, they're often used by people who want to control and use and manipulate. And they can be, in a political realm, as we see today, they can be quite dangerous. They can cause us not to believe in real dangers, like the COVID-19 response that was lacking on the part of President Trump and others, and still by some Republican governors across the country right now, and making arguments that, you know, using false analogies and making arguments that defy the laws of logic, right? But let's get into it, shall we? Let's look at, let me share my screen with you. Share. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to talk about these types of fallacies. All right, give you, because the best way to understand them is just to give you examples. We can't talk about all the logical fallacies because there are literally dozens of them, but we're going to talk about you know, 10 or 12 that are quite common. You may not recognize them by their fancy Greek or Latin names. And I'm going to mostly just use their common popular names, but you'll understand them when they're explained, and you will see how maybe you've used them, your parents have used them, or other people around you have used them. So the first fallacy of reasoning, a common one, is what we call the bandwagon, the ad populum logical fallacy. And that's just this idea that, well, if everybody likes it, you know, if everybody else is doing it, then I ought to do it too. And of course, you know, put the sign up here from McDonald's on this, over 99 billion served. I mean, 99 billion customers can't be wrong, right? And so it's just the bandwagon. It's like, it's popular. And so here's the thing. If 1 million people believe a lie, it is still a lie, okay? So just because something's popular doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's a positive thing or a good thing to be involved in, right? And so you can think about this. Think about not too long ago, maybe when you were still living at home, you had a parent or a guardian and you wanted to go do something, like you really wanted to go to this party, and your mom or your parent or guardian said, no, absolutely not, you can't go. And what was your reasoning with your mother or your parent or guardian as to why you should be able to go? But mom, everybody's going. Everybody's going to be there, all right? And what would your mom say? I am not everybody's mama, right? I'm your mama. If everybody went and jumped off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge? If everybody stuck their head in the toilet, will you stick your head in the toilet, right? And so we know, we see this played out. I mean, any day when you go to the store, if you go to Walmart, not right now because we are in quarantine for COVID-19, we need to stay away, stay home. But, you know, you go to these places and you see these kids, you know, begging their mom for things. And it's like, everybody has one. I need one too, right? So yeah, the bandwagon. Hasty generalizations, right? A hasty generalization is where it's like a stereotype, right? It's where, because this happened over here and it involved a certain, you know, category of people, then I'm going to apply it over here. And so, of course, one of the hasty generalizations is, and I don't know when it started, but, you know, at some point back in time, some husbands got together and talked about their wives and gave examples of them getting stuck or being, you know, otherwise bad drivers. And it's led to this hasty generalization and this common, you know, stereotype about women, women drivers, that women can't drive as good as men, which is absolutely, you know, not true, right? Or, you know, generalizations about people who have red hair. I don't have, I have blonde hair. It's starting to come back after I shaved it. But, you know, a lot of times, you know, people say things like, oh, they're redheaded, so they're fiery, they got a big bad temper or whatever. And that's just a hasty generalization. It's when you know, you make a conclusion too quick and you generalize it to other people who are associated by some sort of demographic classification, right? Then there's the red herring argument, okay? So the red herring argument is where you try to divert the audience's attention away from the real issue to something that's irrelevant. Let's say, and we see politicians do this all the time. So the real issue is, let's just say right now, with the current circumstances, more people are saying, okay, the real issue here is we need free healthcare. We need universal healthcare. We need Medicare for all because of public health. You know, people should be able to go to the doctor, go to the hospital, and get the care they need. Because if they don't, pandemics can happen and they could spread and all these kinds of things. So the real issue is we need Medicare for all. But let's say you're talking to a politician who doesn't want that because they get a lot of money from the healthcare industry, from the pharmaceutical companies, right? The drug companies. And these drug companies, right, pharmaceutical companies, they don't want Medicare for all because then the government would be in control of the price and they wouldn't be able to price gouge the U.S. consumer like they do, right? We all know the cost of certain surgeries and medicines is way higher in the U.S. than it is in the rest of the world, and it doesn't need to be that way. So you bring this up and you say, are you going to support the Medicare for all bill? And what this politician's going to do, this politician doesn't want to talk about this, right? So what he wants to do is quickly spin it you bring up healthcare. Well, the thing that's really going to improve healthcare in America is if people can keep the doctors that they want and the insurance that they want. And, that's what we need. Well, you see, that's an irrelevant issue. It appeals to a certain mentality, but it's not exclusive. You can have Medicare for all and people still go to the doctor that they want, right? So it's irrelevant. Another way to explain this. So I lived in Louisiana for a long time, and I taught at Nicholls State University, and we had a certain senator. It's public knowledge, it's well known, but his name was David Vitter, and he was a senator up until recently, and he was involved in a sex scandal, right? He was involved in a sex scandal where he was caught going to hotels with prostitutes, right? And he even had a fetish for, being dressed up as a baby with a diaper and everything. And, it was really embarrassing, right? Well, here's the issue. I don't care if somebody wants to have sex, if somebody, pays for it or whatever, if they're responsible and, that's their business, okay? But here's a guy who is championing family values, right? He's conservative, Republican, putting himself out there as a Christian, as somebody who represents family values and vote for me because I'm going to protect the sanctity of marriage and all these things, right? And then, behind closed doors, here's what you're doing, right? Well, it come out. It was exposed. So, Senator David Vitter doesn't want to have to talk about that, right? He wants to try to get people to forget it, right? So let's say he were to come to Nicholls State University while I was there, and I attended this town hall meeting that he had. And imagine that I stood up and I said, "Look, Dr. Vitter, Senator Vitter, how can you harmonize, right, your positions of pro-family and saying that you are the candidate for Christians to vote for because you represent family values when you've betrayed that trust, right, with this sex scandal, right?" Well, David Vitter doesn't want to talk about that. So what he's going to do is give me a red herring. He's probably going to attack me. He's probably going to pull like a President Trump. You are a terrible person for asking that question. Get him out of here. What? That's just an ambush. That's what's wrong with professors or the media or whatever, right? You shouldn't even ask a question like that. So he'd probably start with an ad hominem attack and just try to attack me for asking a legitimate question. But if he didn't do that, then he would do a red herring. And what he would say is, I think the people here are far more concerned about how I'm going to create more jobs in this economy than what happened between me and my family and this issue that's a private affair. All right. And then he's going to just, instead of talking about that issue and addressing the hard questions, he's going to then give you his plan for creating more jobs, which I didn't ask about. All right. And then I just mentioned about the ad hominem attack, which is an attack on a person, right? We see Trump do this a lot, particularly with the press, as he attacks them and calls them fake news and, gets mad at them when they don't answer, when they ask a certain question that he doesn't want to answer. He attacks them and he attacks what they represent and their organization. And then he retaliates and doesn't let them, fly on Air Force One to the next event, or he takes their credential away. It was a governor, I think it was the governor of Florida that recently did that with a journalist because the journalist asked, a tough question that he didn't want to answer. So just attack the person. Discredit the person, and then you don't have to deal with the arguments. Well, listen, I think a person ought to be credible, right, and act in an ethical way. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter, who presents the information, right? right? It doesn't matter who asked the question. That question can stand on its own, right? Facts are facts. Truth is truth, no matter where it's coming from, right? But somebody who doesn't want to have to answer a tough question, who doesn't have a better solution, who doesn't have, you know, a comeback to an argument, right, will simply attack the person, right, and shift the focus on that person and the skeletons in that person's closet rather than dealing with the issue. And that's a logical fallacy. A false cause. So a false cause is when we attribute the cause of some phenomenon to something that has nothing to do with it. All right. So, for example, let's say you coach a soccer team, a little league soccer team, and your team is not doing well. You've lost five games in a row, right? And you're like, man, what's happening here? How are we going to get back on the right track? So you review the video, right, of the last 5 matches that you've had that you lost. And then all of a sudden the light bulb comes on because you notice the common link. In all 5 of those games that you lost, the team wore its blue socks instead of its white socks. And you're like, aha, it's the curse of the blue socks. And so you have at your next practice, you have a team meeting, you say, everybody, we're going to wear our white socks for the next game. Because when we wear our blue socks, we lose. And of course, that's not true, right? That's just a false cause. But, you know, sometimes these things can be persuasive, right? There are people who get superstitious, right? And they watch, you know, when they watch their team play, they sit the same way, they wear the same clothes, they eat the same thing. And, you know, they have these rituals or whatever because they actually believe that in some way it's connected to the outcome. But that would be an example of a false cause. Another example, a while back, I saw this Facebook post about some school shooting that had happened, and of course that was tragic. But then it went on and said, but you know what? We need to just take extra caution because it's Bloody April. And they said, you know, they made the point that April was the month when the Columbine shooting happened. It was the month when the Branch Davidian compound in Waco had that shootout and tragedy, and it just made a connection of the Virginia Tech campus shootings, and so the takeaway from that was, you know, be on guard, exercise extra vigilance because it's April. Well, the fact that it's April doesn't mean school shootings are going to happen. Bad things are going to happen, right? These things just happen to happen in April, but a lot of similar things have happened at other times, other months. So just because it's April doesn't mean bad things are going to happen. But yet sometimes people make these false connections, things that are correlated, right? But they're not cause effect. Oh, that just happened here. There we go. Building on an unproven assumption. All right, this happens a lot. So you just take for granted that people already know and accept some premises, some facts, some knowledge, and you just take that for granted. So an example might be, let's say you wanted to give a speech about adopting dogs, right? One of the things that's happening right now is everybody is staying home and working from home. I say everybody, you know, vast numbers of people are, is that animal shelters are seeing a huge increase in the amount of people coming wanting to adopt pets because you're home, you don't have much to do, you're lonely, you're not having the social interaction, so you want a pet, you want a dog, you want a cat. Well, let's just say you're going to give a speech on adopting a dog, and you start off the speech something like, well, we all know that dogs are man's best friend and dogs make the best family pets. So today I'm going to to talk to you about 5 things you need to keep in mind before you adopt your dog. Well, you're assuming, right? What are you assuming? You're assuming that the audience agrees with you that dogs are the best companion animal, right? When some people may think it's a cat. You know, some people may love their iguana, you know, or their pet spider or a ferret or whatever, right? A parrot, a bird. And so, you know, you have, and I find myself with students, like I teach communication research methods class, and students have to write a paper in there. They have to do research, and I'm all the time pointing out to them how you're given an unsubstantiated claim here. You're just expecting that I'm going to accept this without proving it to me. You have to prove it. You've got to cite statistics. You've got to quote experts, right? You got to prove things. You can't just give the assumption, make the claim, and expect people to accept it at face value. Arguments from ignorance, okay? Well, we can't act on what we know because of what we don't know. You see, politicians do this a lot of times. We know enough that we know we need to take this kind of action. But then this politician goes, oh, but yeah, but we don't know this and we don't know that and we don't know this. So until we know everything, we can't do anything. And that's why nothing ever gets done, right? And so this is a picture of a guy who's become very discredited, but he's a congressperson who from Texas. I don't know if he's still in office, but he often spoke against any kind of policy to support climate change or global warming. He's bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. And so there's a clip on YouTube, and if I don't have it in the notes currently on the PowerPoint file, I will upload it. But where he's talking to this science expert from, I think, NASA or some government office that's about conducting scientific research and reporting to Congress about that. And the scientist is talking about how we need to take action, and we need to take action now to stop the terrible effects of climate change, of global warming, and what we're doing to it. And then this guy speaks up, and he brings in this obscure theory of global wobbling that happens every now and then and can impact weather patterns. And global wobbling is basically, as the name implies, is when the globe, right, the Earth wobbles a little bit on its axis, and it creates shifts in weather patterns. And he's like, well, nobody has looked into global wobbling, and if maybe that could be behind all this. So until we know about global wobbling, we can't do anything here. And that's just an argument from ignorance. And in the video, the scientist had a good comeback for it. So we need to focus on what we do know, right? And sometimes you know enough that you know you need to take action, right? And for someone to just say, yeah, but we don't know, right? Well, you can't know everything, right? So arguments from ignorance are not sufficient to, to discredit arguments of what we ought to do. Then the false analogy. I may have shared this one with you in class already, but basically in a similar fashion about, we're comparing, in this case, ice melting in a glass to ice melting in the ocean, the polar ice caps melting and breaking away, these huge glaciers that are on land, and the polar ice caps that are breaking apart and sliding down and falling into the ocean. And the false analogy is made, and this was done on the floor of Congress as well by a congressperson who stood up and who made the case that sea levels aren't rising from ice melting, because when your ice melts in your water glass, the water doesn't rise and overflow. Well, that's true because of the law of displacement. right? Now, this image here that I have on the screen would actually not be a good case because you have ice that actually is above the top of the glass. And so as that melts, it is going to overflow, right? But if all the ice were within the glass, right, then because of the law of displacement, the ice comes down and displaces the water up. But as it melts, the water, there's an equilibrium, right? And so the water level does not rise. It's going to stay the same as the ice melts. But that's not an analogy with what's happening with the polar ice caps melting, because that ice is not already in the ocean, right? Greenland is an island, right? And the ice that's melting on that island, the glaciers that are melting and falling off into the ocean is new ice that's being added into the glass, as it were. And so that's a false analogy, right? It's a false analogy. Another example would be, conspiracy theories often have false analogies. So a conspiracy theory that, the government has a cure for cancer, but won't let us have it because of the money, right, in treating cancer and all of this. And they'll create a false analogy. They'll say, well, we put a man on the moon. We've put a man on the moon so we can cure cancer, right? Well, you're dealing with two different things, right? When you're talking about putting a man on the moon, right? And obviously that's been debated whether that really happened or not, and I'm not going to get into that. But assuming we did put a man on the moon, that's just an issue of technology. It's physics. It's, overcoming gravity and, thrust and all these things, right? And building the right equipment that can create the right amount of thrust and get up there and get back and all this. It's just it's an engineering and math problem. Curing cancer is a complicated, cellular living organism. You're just comparing apples and oranges with that. False dilemma or either or reasoning is another fallacy. And it's basically where you reduce things down to where you say, we only have two choices here. When the truth of the matter is there are a lot of other options, right? It's not just yes or no. It's not just black or white. An example might be someone who's really passionate about eating healthy would maybe make a case that would be exaggerated in this way to say, either we all start eating plant-based organic foods or we're going to get cancer and die. Really? I mean, I'm all about eating plant-based and eating organic when I can, but I don't think the only options are we eat plant-based and organic or we die of cancer, right? There are other options, right? Then there's the straw man argument. The straw man is commonly used in debating situations where someone, where you create an argument that is a straw man. It's really a fake enemy, right? It's not the real enemy. It's sort of similar to a red herring in that, you create this opponent, this caricature of your opponent, and then you beat that philosophically, right? With your arguments, you beat that straw man up. Anybody can beat up a straw man, right? You're doing a caricature. And so we see this like in the current political milieu, right, of the 2020 race with Bernie Sanders. They turned Bernie Sanders into a straw man with this word socialist or communist. Well, Bernie Sanders isn't really a socialist or a communist in the way that we think of those terms, right? Those are terms that in America have very negative connotations, right? And they mean like government controls everything and people have no freedoms and no rights and it's, everybody are atheists and you can't have freedom of religion and just all these things, and people, they murder their own people and do ethnic cleansing and just all this terrible stuff, right? that has been historically associated with that. And so if I can convince you, right, if I can just use that term of socialist to Bernie Sanders, then I've created this straw man that then I can just beat the hell out of, right? But I've not actually engaged Bernie Sanders in his views, in his arguments, and his policies, right? Instead, I've just said he's a socialist. And we, do you really want to live under social communism? I mean, do you, look up what Stalin did? And, so that would be an example of turning someone into a straw man to defeat them. But you're doing so unethically because you're not really representing them in dealing with who they really are and what their views really are. Then there's a loaded question. That's a fallacy. Well, I believe I'm the best candidate because I'm the best choice among the people running. Well, that's begging the question, right? I mean, you've not given me a reason. Okay, I'm the best candidate because I'm the most qualified. Well, no, that begs the question. What makes you qualified? You see, that's not an argument. Okay, you're begging the question. Okay, so, and we see this a lot of times with people trying to give these real short answers that are dismissive, right? And you'll see the journalists on TV say, wait, but what do you mean when you say that? And they don't want to answer, right? And they're loaded questions. Oh, no, you know what? I just messed up there. I was talking about begging the question, which is probably next. So forgive me for that. So what I was just talking about was begging the question. And that's when you answer a question, but in a way that leaves questions to be answered. Okay. That's this one right here. So let me go on to that and show you that one. So that's begging the question, right? So when you answer something or you present information in a way that leaves questions unanswered, right? Well, exactly, how is this the case? Why is this the case? You've got to answer the questions. Now, loaded question. Let me get back to this. What is a loaded question? Loaded question is a question that's asked in a way that if you answer it, implies guilt, right? So if I asked you the question like, when did you stop taking drugs? You see, that's a loaded question because if I answer that, I'm admitting that I was taking drugs, right? How fast were you driving when you were speeding? You see, that's a loaded question. If I answer that question, I'm implicating myself, right? All right, then we're going to end with the slippery slope. And this is perhaps the queen, this and ad populum, because everybody's doing it. Either that one or the slippery slope, probably the most used logical fallacy, definitely one of them. And the slippery slope, I'm using the picture that you see here of a wedding cake with two men on it, same-sex marriage, because that's an example of, because I once heard perhaps the most outlandish slippery slope argument I've ever heard at a public debate on the topic of gay marriage. This was before the Supreme Court weighed in and said it's constitutional. So at my former university, we had a debate in which we had a pro speaker and a con speaker, and they were arguing for and against legalizing same-sex marriage. Well, after the two students gave their speeches, it was opened up for comments, all right? And the audience was made up of a couple of hundred college students, mostly those who were taking public speaking classes. And I was moderating the debate. I was up on the stage and I was at the microphone at the time, calling on people who would get the microphone to make a comment or raise a question. And this student got the question, and what they would do is everybody had to state their name and then say if they were pro or con, and then they could make a comment, or they could ask a question of one or both of the speakers for them to address in their follow-up remarks. So this student comes up, and I don't remember his name, but he just, he said something like this, and this is kind of how it went. Yeah, I'm Billy Bob, and I'm Con. I'm against gay marriage, and it's just not the way God intended it to be. He'd have made Adam and Steve if he wanted gay marriage, and I mean, but think about it. I mean, the reason why God gave us marriage was, the main reason is procreation, so we can be plentiful and fill the earth, and make babies, and two people of the same sex can't do that. And therefore, you take away the main reason for marriage. And, the thing is, let's just say we legalize gay marriage, and what's going to happen to this country? What's going to happen to the population of this country? I mean, people are going to stop having babies. And then, another 20 years from now, what's going to happen is, somebody's going to look at us and see that we're weak because we don't have a lot of young people. And if we needed to draft an army, we wouldn't be able to. And so, China or somebody, I don't know why it's China, but it was China. China's going to take over this country. And I mean, I'm sitting there trying to just keep a straight face, because this person is actually making the argument that legalizing gay marriage will result in China hostily overtaking our country, invading and conquering our country. And of course, he was building on some unproven assumptions. There were a number of logical fallacies in what the student had to say. He built on an unproven assumption that everybody believes in God, or that everybody accepts a literal interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve, and he just accepted that. And he also, kind of had a false dilemma of, either you are in a heterosexual marriage and you have children, or you're in a same-sex marriage and you can't have children. Well, with in vitro fertilization and other methods, same-sex couples have children all the time, even their own biological children. So, there were just a lot of things wrong with that reasoning, right? And look, part of the reason why I bring up this example is, I'm not here trying to change, how you view about certain social issues, right? I mean, I may have my opinions and I may have my reasons, and if you ask me, I would tell you. But I mean, at that event, I wasn't there to try to convince people to accept gay marriage or to reject gay marriage. But what I tell my students is, I want you to be able to represent your viewpoint well. And of course, I think there's some things that you can't argue for well, because they're just ridiculous. But that's another lecture for another day. But the point is, if you're conservative and you think gay marriage shouldn't be legal, then I want you to be able to articulate that. I want you to be able to build good arguments and not ridiculous arguments that frankly are just stupid, and that really wind up discrediting you and doing more harm to your viewpoint than if you'd have just kept your mouth shut, right? So the point here is not whether you have a liberal belief or a conservative belief or just whatever label you want to call it, but it's about building good arguments, about representing, knowing why you believe what you believe and being able to articulate that. Then there's a just in case fallacy of reasoning. I said that slippery slope was the last, but I've got just a couple more. And that's where, an example would be when President Trump got elected, and one of the first things he did was wanted to implement a travel ban from Muslim nations. And the reason is, well, just in case, you never know, and appealing to this fear. And, what's wrong with that is that, you got over 1 billion Muslims in the world. And if they were all terrorists, I mean, imagine the way things would be. I mean, come on. Such a small percentage of Muslims are militant and are terrorists, right? When you consider the billion, just the same way as the billion or so Christians in the world, you know, a small percentage of them are fanatical and, you know, want to blow up abortion clinics and things like that. And so the just in case really, you know, does a lot more harm than it does good, right? And then the non sequitur. You know, that's where your argument is based on really the, you know, it's just dismissive. It's a very dismissive thing, right? So in this little meme here, people died of cancer before cigarettes were invented, so smoking doesn't cause cancer, right? Well, just because it existed before you had cigarettes doesn't mean that this one now doesn't do it too, right? In a similar way, you may say, well, you know, my grandma smoked cigarettes for 70 years and she lived to be 90 years old, so she never got cancer. Well, congratulations, right? Your grandmother was a very lucky woman, right? But you don't establish a norm from the exception of the norm. And you don't make this non sequitur argument from silence, right? Because in the past, there were people had cancer and they were dying of cancer before cigarette smoking, so cigarette smoking doesn't cause it. Logical fallacy. And then appeals to authority. We're still on the cigarette smoking link, but one of the ways that cigarette companies tried to encourage people to start smoking and take up smoking is they would use actual doctors in their advertising, right? In this case, this is an actual ad from, I don't know, probably the 1950s. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. So, well, my goodness, if it's good enough for a doctor, it's good enough for me, because that's an authority figure, right? And it's this appeal to authority where you just bring in, because someone does it and this someone is an authoritative figure, it's okay. And a lot of harm has been done in the world from people making appeals to authority. And then lying with statistics. I've already shown you this graph in another lecture, but this is an example of lying with statistics, being deceptive, truncating the y-axis to make numbers, to make statistics appear to be indicating something that they're not. So in this case, in case you missed the earlier lecture, what's happened is the y-axis has been truncated. And so if you look at the left bottom number, it's 94 million, not 0. See? So if the bottom number was 0, all of these red bars would be hugely longer. And the amount of increase from 2009 to 2011 would not look as drastic of a steep incline, right? It's really only about 10%. All right? So that's the end of the lecture here today on logical fallacies. There are many other logical fallacies, but these are some of the most common ones that we run into. So stay safe, and I'll be in touch.